I'm Kore-eda, and welcome to More Than Kurosawa, a brand new series that I'm going to be doing for the next few months over on this channel, talking about the wonders of Asian cinema. But, of course, many of you are new to this series, but I imagine some people checking out this video have been watching some of my Oscar content that I've been doing for the past few months. That's my bread and butter on this channel, but during this kind of off-season period when the Oscars aren't happening, I always like to do a different kind of series, and this year starting off with a new one, More Than Kurosawa. So just at the top, I want to discuss the thinking behind doing this series and what you can expect for the coming months. So essentially, I wanted to cover and really do a deep dive and explore the great films throughout Asian cinema, throughout multiple decades, a bunch of different genres, and the plan of the series is to review and cover and celebrate, really, ultimately, a new film every single week by a new director every single week. So we're covering Hirokazu Kore-eda today. We're not going to cover any more of his films. And I think in recent years, a lot of people have been appreciating and enjoying and discovering directors like Bong Joon-ho or Park Chan-wook, and trying to understand some of their films and become big fans of them ultimately. And I'm in a similar boat in many ways, where I think many of you, maybe took some film classes, maybe went to film school, and you learn about Akira Kurosawa. And that's why this series is called More Than Kurosawa, because I want to understand and look at films that are more than just Akira Kurosawa's films. Because I know, in my instance, for example, I watched a lot of his movies pretty early on. That was my introduction to Asian cinema, and then I didn't go too much further than that. And it was a great introduction. You know, we're not going to criticize Akira Kurosawa. He's an excellent filmmaker with many masterpieces in my mind. And it makes sense why you're introduced to him, because he's, created the action templates in a movie like Seventh Samurai and has so many other great movies as well. But I think it's important to note that when we do discover a Bong Joon-ho, for many people, their first movie of his was Parasite. And despite that, he'd made so many other great movies before then, just kind of finally getting his recognition for a movie like Parasite. And that's the thinking behind this series, is to talk about a different Asian director every single week, to introduce people to other international directors, kind of with that thinking of what Bong Joon-ho said in his Golden Globes acceptance speech just a few years ago, where if you overcome that 1-inch barrier of subtitles, you open yourself up to a whole brand new world of cinema. And that's the thinking behind this series, to introduce people to some great films that I've seen, to also force myself to explore Asian cinema and watch films from different directors that I've never seen before. So please feel free to comment below with some of your favorite Asian movies. We're going to try to be as not too broad. We'd like to be a little bit more specific. So, of course, I'm not going to cover a Bong Joon-ho movie or a Hayao Miyazaki movie. We're going to be a little bit more niche than that. We're going to try to cover old masters who have passed away, but then also some people that have only made a couple of movies. So we're trying to track the next Bong Joon-ho. Really just wanting to celebrate mostly East Asian cinema, but I'm open to South Asian cinema as well as we explore this series and go throughout the coming months. So if you're still an Oscar fan, I implore you to give this series a shot, check it out, see if you like it. Maybe subscribe to the channel, jump in and out for certain movies that you recognize. But at the very least, I'll be able to co-sign pretty much every movie that I discuss on this series, as an opportunity to introduce you to some more expanded taste in terms of Asian cinema. And I'm really excited to get this started. So with that out of the way, just my general philosophy on the series. The structure will change, I think, throughout the coming episodes, but kind of how I'm thinking of covering things. Just discuss the director briefly and give some context to why I wanted to cover him in one of his movies or her movies. And then in the second half of the video, just discuss why I chose that movie, why I think it's maybe a good starting point for learning more about this director, and why that movie is such a great movie and a high recommendation ultimately from me. So starting off with why I wanted to cover a Hirokazu Kore-eda film, and I wanted to start off with him in particular because I wanted to not do someone that's super obscure, who no one's ever heard of, particularly at least for these first couple episodes before we transition into more of the niche directors, but still trying to keep someone who is somewhat well known and notable. Just released a film last year, Monster, very critically acclaimed. You've heard of some of his other films, I'm sure. Shoplifters, I think a few years ago, kind of got a big buzz. Classics like Afterlife. Still Walking, of course, which we're going to cover. Underrated films like Air Doll and After the Storm. I covered him because he's a director that's working today, but is still an old master in the sense that he's got a real breadth of films, where I would consider him a filmmaker with multiple amazing movies. So he's someone that if you check out this movie and you enjoy it, maybe you can see some of his other films as well, but still somewhat relevant because he's still making movies today, and good movies today as well. And then also I wanted to cover him because I really enjoy a lot of his films. Like I mentioned, he does make some amazing, great movies, and his career kind of has shifted. I think Still Walking being a good example of his earlier period, which is a little bit more gentle, I guess you could say, in a way, but more contemplative, very humanist. If I were to compare him to, more popular North American Western director, you'd say like a Richard Linklater. I think he reminds me of, in his humanist perspective, in his incredible sharp ability to write a dialogue. So the first period focused more on those kind of familial relationships, mothers and sons, or sons and fathers, or husbands and wives, that kind of intergenerational family dynamics he's very much interested in a kind of profound, simplistic, profound way, which kind of reminds me of Linklater in so much of the poetry of his writing. Simple things that feel like they can be said from certain characters and real people, but still have that element of profoundness to them. So that's kind of the first part of his career. And then I think in recent years, with a movie like Shoplifters or Monster, almost becoming like a parable of morals director. He's interested in what would you do in this scenario, interested in, I think, almost in a way evolving his style to using his approach to humanist directors and his deep understanding of human behavior and putting that into more complex situations. So instead of kind of interplay between families, it's interplays between people and society, and that kind of pushback, which is why I think a lot of people celebrate Shoplifters, because I think it felt like a jump forward. But even still, with saying that, he will have weirder movies like an Air Doll, which still feels like a Kore-eda film, but is wholly kind of its own itself too. So he's one of my most interesting directors that I'm always fascinated to see what he does next. He does do movies relatively frequently, though, too, so you can always check out the next one and keep him in the back of your mind if you're not interested in checking out this movie, although it is still a high recommend for me. So now, just transitioning over into the discussion of the film, I wanted to talk about this film in particular because I think it's a great film in general, but it's also a great film for you to understand Kore-eda, and kind of a great entry film in many ways too. And that's not always the case. If you look at a filmmaker like Alfred Hitchcock, I would say maybe Vertigo is one of his better movies, but Vertigo is definitely a movie that I think you get extra appreciation for on rewatches, yes, but also after having seen all of Hitchcock's movies, because it has that kind of meta element to it. So sometimes the recommend, or the filmmaker's best movie isn't always the movie you start with to really understand their style. And I do think this movie could be seen as one of Kore-eda's all-time bests, but also is a great starting point to understanding his style, particularly, at the very least, understanding his style for that first period of the early 90s into the kind of 2000s, before he, I think, kind of has evolved a bit in the 2010s. But still, this movie gives you a lot of what I love about Kore-eda, and in particular, his ability to transport you into a world. I think his sharp and keen sense of human behavior and how people speak and act and interact with others gives it a strong sense of reality. And I think for a lot of people, when they talk about movies that they like, especially just general people who are not super big movie fans, oftentimes will go, oh, it was super realistic. When people say that, I think in many ways they feel like, oh, it was true to life. So not necessarily that it was gritty or grounded or realistic, but it was realistic in that it felt relatable, it felt true, it felt like real people. And that's a quality, a positive for, I think, a lot of general moviegoers, and Kore-eda is a master at that. In particular with something like Still Walking, I kind of categorize it as a sci-fi movie, even though it's definitely not a sci-fi movie. A simple movie, really, about a man and his new wife and stepson, and him introducing them to his family and his siblings and his parents in the countryside where they live in the city. And us, the viewer, similar to Hiroshi Abe's character, are kind of launched into a completely different world. It's not the city, it's kind of more in the countryside. You have to travel to get there. And say it feels like a sci-fi movie because there's no phones in sight. It feels like it's of a different era. You're totally trapped in many ways in this house, which feels very peaceful, especially at the beginning. And I think Kore-eda is able to really accentuate that feeling using this great soft lighting, slow pace, still camera work. He really teaches you how to watch the movie by kind of having a more slow, deliberate, considered pace in many ways, while keeping kind of that soft lighting to, I think, evoke a bit of a nostalgic feeling as well. Feels like of another time, even though set in the 2000s. So in many ways, that's great because it's an interesting visual approach, but of course, it stems from that character and their motivations. Because like Hiroshi Abe's character, he's kind of separated from his family, he's in the city, he's built his own life with his new wife and this new stepson, and he's going back in the past in many ways to deal with, introduce his parents and deal with kind of some of the trauma that they've incurred in the past with some of the different family members without spoiling anything. It's ultimately just an incredibly transporting movie, like I said, because of some of those technical elements that he's able to capture, but in the way of the slowness of the editing and the stillness of the camera work. Kore-eda, I think what's great about this movie is he teaches you how to watch it. And then when we actually get to the house and understand more of the plot and the drama of the situation, Kore-eda's writing really, I think, excels. You have, it's a true ensemble piece, and the great part about it is every character has their own dynamics between each other. So the man who has the wife and the new stepson is being introduced to them. He has a different relationship with his sibling and than he does with his own parents. You know, of course, the parents still see him as a kid, so maybe talk to him in a different way. And then even the grandfather and the new stepson, they have their own dynamic. And you kind of understand and slowly reveal the true motives of some of this trip, I guess you would say, and how people view each other. And you really do feel like you get a sense of this family and who they are, which is a testament to, like I mentioned earlier, some of that poetry of Kore-eda's writing and that deep understanding of human behavior. So that's why I think the movie is so excellent, is because it's able to transport you in this great way, which of course is connected to the character's own feelings of being in this new place, feeling like he's going back in time just because he's spending time with his family and they have their own dynamic. And the premise is very simple. And I think that you may go, oh, that's a kind of a nothing of a movie. And what I do want to highlight and stress is that they do such a great job with the pace of the editing and the slowness of it, so that by the time we get about 40 minutes into the movie and we start to reveal the drama of what the movie kind of is really about, and like I mentioned, some of those family dynamics of how they speak with each other, or past resentment or trauma or anger that boils over, or personal resentment of how their life turned out, or what have you, we start to get more of the drama and the dynamics of the family. By the time we get to that point, it almost sneaks up on you because you've been so kind of entranced by the pace that's been set within those first 30-ish minutes. So by the time the drama hits, it hits you like a ton of bricks because it's you understand these characters so well. And once that kind of politeness slips away, we get to the real heart of the emotion. It's just a brilliantly well-paced movie. Kore-eda is so talented here in this movie of transporting you to this new world through the editing, through the cinematography and the photography. And then once he gets you there, he keeps you hooked by that realist, humanistic drama and the different interplay of these characters and the three-dimensionality they're able to bring because of their different ways of interacting with other characters and some of their dialogue. It's a very specific movie that is excelled by Kore-eda's sharp sense of people and excellent script. Still Walking is one of the better movies of Kore-eda's career, and it's a great example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is a high recommend for me. I started this series for a reason, starting off with this movie, which I think is just an awesome sci-fi-esque movie, and that's one of the most transporting experiences of all time, even though it's set, during the modern day of when it was filmed. Still, I hope you guys appreciated this video. Comment below, let me know if you've seen the movie or if you're excited to check it out. I'd love to hear that. And stay tuned for next week, where we're going to be covering the film Secret Sunshine from director Lee Chang-dong. If you want to watch that in advance for that episode, please feel free to do that. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.